Our guest is Len Marzulli. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he holds an honorary doctorate from Pacific International University for his research on the Nephilim. He's appeared on numerous radio and television programs discussing the burgeoning UFO phenomena as well as ancient prophetic manuscripts. And he believes that we're living in a time when we see many of these prophecies fulfilled. He also warns of what he has described as a great deception, which is supernatural and paranormal in origin. And the title of his best-selling book is called Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural, The Coming Great Deception and the Luciferian Endgame. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome for the first time ever on the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show, Len, is it Marzulli? Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Pronouncing it correctly.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Mr. Marzulli. I appreciate you being here with us this evening.
Thank you.
So now you've got a doctorate or an honorary doctorate from Pacific International. You did research on the Nephilim. I mentioned that. For our listeners, we have a lot of new listeners to the paranormal realm here. Give me a quick explanation. What is the Nephilim?
Wow, that's quite a mouthful. There's actually 3 novels that I wrote based on the Nephilim. It's called the Nephilim Trilogy, but it comes from 2 sources. Both are very ancient manuscripts. One is found in the biblical Genesis. The other one is found in what is known as the Book of Enoch. But there's also other mentions of the Nephilim in other works of antiquity, such as Josephus, a first-century Jewish historian, who wrote about that the bones of these creatures were apparently openly displayed in Jerusalem at the time of his writing. And of course, this is first century. So, very strange. But let me answer it this way, that according to the mythos from both of these, or the story, now, and the reason why I call it mythos, let me define that. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. I only have these documents that tell us that this is what happened. So either you believe it or you don't believe it. And what I find interesting is that if it was only one source, it would be perhaps a canard or spurious. But the fact that there's more than one source, for instance, you've got the Genesis account, you've got the Book of Enoch, you've also had the Book of Jared, you've got Josephus commenting on them, and others. And then we seem to have like remnants. In other words, not only skeletons have we seen, giant bones, whatever, but we also see perhaps the remnant of the Nephilim. And so, in other words, what they may have constructed on the planet during their brief stay here. So the Nephilim, according to the Book of Genesis and the Book of Enoch, is the offspring of fallen angels and the women of earth. And I realize that is just, some of your listeners are going, what?
Right.
I don't blame you, because it's freaky stuff. It's really, really freaky stuff. But when you get into it and you start to, especially the Book of Enoch, Genesis in the biblical account is kind of a truncated view of the event. It's no more than really several paragraphs. That's it. The Book of Enoch, on the other hand, is the whole tome is devoted to discovering and trying to, well, not amplifying, let's say, that Genesis 6 account, not discovering, but amplifying that. So what you read is, in the Genesis, is kind of like a Cliff's Note version.
Right.
The sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair and desired them, and took whoever they wanted for wives. And the offspring of that became the Nephilim, mighty men of renown. The Book of Enoch lists names, places, what happened, how big they were, what they did, the quid pro quo between the fallen angels and the men of earth before they could have access to the female population. I mean, it's really, really bizarre stuff. All that to say that the Nephilim, of course, were never supposed to be here. In other words, this is an abomination. This is literally interbreeding between 2 different species that just was not supposed to happen. I also believe that, and we've got this from Greek mythology, that some of the Titans, let's say, linguistically and even the storyline can be traced back to this Genesis 6, or this Enochian, if I can use that word, the Enochian account of the fallen angels coming to earth, cohabiting with the women, and the offspring being the Nephilim, or the Nephilim.
Right. Now, let's talk real quickly, too, just again to give our listeners some background, because a lot of the people that come from a religious ilk will not recognize the Book of Enoch from the Bible, which is strange, again, because the book was not put into the finalized Bible that we have, but it's referenced throughout the Bible. And it's actually a book that was written and tells kind of a darker side and a different part of the Bible history, and it just was never included, although the strange conundrum, again, is that they refer to it throughout the Bible, correct?
Correct. They actually refer to it in 3 different places. One is the Book of Jude, the other one is 2 Peter, and then Paul alludes to it in Corinthians. So the book was widely read. I mean, it's found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Is it part of the canon? No, it's not part of the canon. But we can certainly appreciate its historicity and look back and say that, if this is true, And I kind of believe it's very much true. Then what are we looking at? Interestingly enough, there's a quote attributed to the first century rabbi Yeshua HaMashiach, and he says that when the Son of Man returns, it will be like the days of Noah, which begs the question, what differentiates the days of Noah than any other time in history? And, of course, it is the presence of the fallen angels. I mean, history, as far as we know it, is pretty much linear. I mean, things have gone on, and yes, there's technology, and from the Industrial Revolution to the time that we live in now, there's a huge upsurge in technology and human revelation. I'll admit to that. But basically, what differentiates the days of Noah from any other time in history, in my opinion, is the presence of the B'nai Elohim, which is the fallen angels dwelling on the earth, which begs the question again, are we looking at that right now? Is it similar? In other words, and this, of course, ties into the whole UFO thing, are we looking at a similarity between what happened with the fallen angels thousands and thousands of years ago and what is happening now? And in my opinion, of course, the answer is yes. The deal, and it took me a while, to get here, and I realized that there's definitely a jump from something that happened thousands of years ago to what's happening today. And I stand on the shoulders of my theological mentor, if I can use those terms, Dr. I.D.E. Thomas, who wrote a book called The Omega Conspiracy, which talks and really relates to this insurgence or excursion, let's say, of fallen angels coming to Earth, cohabiting with the women, and the offspring being the Nephilim, which was never supposed to happen, by the way, which and as a quick sidebar, they were here 400 to 450 years, and shortly thereafter, we know that some sort of a global flood happened. Almost all cultures throughout the world have some sort of a flood story. And in that flood story, although it may be different, slightly, there's some slight changes, they still believe that there was a flood that apparently wiped out everybody except for 8 people. Do I believe that? Yes, I do, because there's just too many stories from different cultures spread throughout the planet. I mean, China has a flood story encrypted,
right?
Literally encrypted in their Chinese glyphs. It's there. The flood story is there.
Well, it's not even China. It's in all parts of the world. There's different versions of the story.
Well, the same thing. I live in California. The Chumash Indians literally have a flood story.
We have a quick question from our chat room, if I can throw this out to you while we're talking about this. User 67 says, this man is totally correct from a historical point of view if he used the Bible as a history book. My question is this. Biblical text also says that the fallen angels who bred our women also taught us to forge metal, use plants to treat disease, taught men about fire, among other things. Are they really the bad guys or the good guys? And where would we be if we didn't understand these concepts?
Great question. Thank you so much. Here's the deal. There was a quid pro quo. There was something for something. And before they had access to the female population, they traded what? They traded technology. Does that ring a bell with anybody who studied the UFO phenomena? What apparently, according to, UFO mythos, because that's what it is, wasn't there, don't know. And neither were you or anybody else who said that, no, it's all, secondhand information from witnesses that have finally come forward and talked about that at some point in time, our government, the United States government, and not the government, maybe that we see, perhaps a shadow government, I don't know, but people in that government apparently made some sort of a deal with so-called extraterrestrials. The movie Taken by Steven Spielberg, talks about this at great length, the most expensive miniseries ever created for television, 20 hours, and yet it's only aired on the Sci-Fi Channel, not a major network. Not bashing the Sci-Fi Channel here, but I mean, why not NBC or ABC? I mean, come on, 20 hours only on the Sci-Fi Channel, and in that, it's sort of a roots, if I can use that, an Alex Haley roots of ufology, and it talks about that there was some sort of one of the episodes. There's definitely a trade that goes on between our government, the government of the United States, and these so-called extraterrestrials. They're allowed access to the population, and for that, quid pro quo, they get technology. Doesn't that ring a bell? Doesn't that mirror, in essence, what happened in the days of Noah, when there's that trade? Before they get to the women, according to the book of Enoch, there's a trade. They show them primitive weapon making. Now, that doesn't mean that that's all they had up their sleeve. For instance,
I mention, too, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, please. The strange thing, if I remember that correctly, was when God punished them, he locked them away, right? And they were put away for a period of however thousands of years, and it just so happens that when they were released coincides with the Industrial Revolution that took place. Is that correct?
I've heard that. I don't know enough about that, and I've never delved into it enough to really weigh in on that. It's an interesting theory.
Because it's amazing how we went from very little technology to an explosion.
Yes.
All of a sudden.
It's almost bizarre. If you were to chart history or the progress of mankind, let's say from 5,000 years ago to the Industrial Revolution, basically it's a flat line. Nothing really happens. Yeah, you get some little twitters, Gutenberg and the printing press. That's huge. You flip on the radar screen, and Bach writing music and the invention of some instruments and Western music as we know it. I mean, there's some certain blips. The Renaissance certainly is a major blip, but when you get to the Industrial Revolution, it's like it just goes off the charts. And then when you get to the information age, which is where we are now, it's exponential. It just goes through the roof. And so, knowledge increases. And it's interesting, in my opinion, and this ties into the second leg of the book, Prophecy. The title of the book, Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural. And the second leg of the book, Prophecy, it discusses the idea that that I believe this is a fulfillment of the prophecy, which is about 2,500 years ago in the book of Daniel, which talks about men will run to and fro over the face of the earth, and knowledge will increase. Okay, let's look at that. Men will run all over the face of the earth, and knowledge will increase. Well, until aviation and until the Industrial Revolution, and certainly the information age, I mean, again, we talked about this, it's pretty much a flat line for 5,000 years.
Right. Do you mind if we take a couple more calls from listeners here, Len, before we get in?
Let's do it, sure.
All right. We've got Andy from Prior Lake is on the line with us, had some questions about aliens. Andy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me on, Dave.
Thank you.
I got a question for Mr. Marzulli. The book, I don't know a lot about this book, Behold a Pale White Horse. I don't know if it rings any bells to you guys. The writer of the book, he came out later on in his life and about all the Area 51 stuff. I'm just wondering if they don't know really what happened to him at the end of his life. They say he was murdered. They say, do you know anything about that?
Are you asking whether he was murdered, the author of the book?
Yes.
It's very interesting. He was definitely shot by a police officer, and again, I wasn't there, don't know. The widow has gone on the record saying that it was an accident, never should have happened. Who knows? I find it very interesting that this guy was a whistleblower. His name escapes me for right now, but I've read the book. I know the content. He's all over the internet, especially on YouTube. He was an early whistleblower talking about Area 51. I've been to Area 51, didn't see anything, but I've talked, and I actually interviewed, that might be too much of a far of a sidebar, but I interviewed a two-star general, retired two-star general, and I was able to, from the body language, ascertain that something that was going on there, it may be directly linked to what we would call an extraterrestrial presence, but that's my own conclusion. Do I have proof? No.
Bonnie, we're going to take your call here. Let's take Bonnie. You're calling from Chicago, and you want to know about fallen angels. Go ahead.
Yes. Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you for calling in.
Thanks, Bonnie.
No problem. Fallen angels, that's kind of a new concept for me. I've kind of stayed away from anything like that, and I've focused on just angels. And so listening to you talk, I'm wondering, are fallen angels still here on Earth? Do we encounter them? What are their characteristics if they still are here in present day?
They're known as the New Kids on the Block, and they've got a rockin' new tour coming out this year.
It's a great question, Bonnie. Here's the deal, and I'll answer that in a very interesting part of ancient manuscripts. There's a story in a manuscript that's about 2,500 years old. It's specifically called the Book of Daniel, and in that book, Daniel basically drops to his knees and says a prayer. Okay, a prayer meaning or request. He needs to hear. He needs to get an answer. So he's really desperate. So he drops to his knees, says a prayer to, let's say, El Shaddai. All right, for lack of a better word. And he says his prayer to El Shaddai, and nothing happens. About 21 days later, this is what the text says now. This is really bizarre stuff. Daniel's just kind of cruising around. All of a sudden, this angel appears to him. Well, apparently, when you're in the presence of these angelic beings, the power is overwhelming. So Daniel falls on his face as if dead, literally, according to the text. Remember, this is Daniel writing what he experienced. The angel comes over and picks him up and says, "Don't fear, Daniel, oh beloved man of El Shaddai." And he says, from the first moment that you uttered this prayer, this request, I was dispatched to help you. And here's the deal, Bonnie, listen up. But I was restrained by the prince of Persia, i.e. a fallen angel, a demonic, satanic entity. And in fact, he was detained so much that he had to go back for reinforcements, which he does, and he gets this other angel called Michael, and the two of them, and perhaps hordes more, hundreds, thousands, who knows? The text doesn't say. I wish it would have amplified that battle. But apparently, they win. They're able to get through, and then he appears to Daniel. And then at the end of the visitation, he says, I must go now because I have to do battle elsewhere. So what we see in the supernatural or the paranormal realm is that this war is going on continually. This war between good angelic forces and evil or malevolent angelic forces, and it's continuing. We also can take the book of Revelation, where it talks very specifically about a battle in the future. Now, this is a real mind screw from us, because we're sitting here going, well, how can someone write about something that hasn't happened yet? I mean, that's just bizarre. And, of course, that's what prophecy is. And that begs the question, if there is prophecy, and it's not Nostradamus, which is real fuzzy and, you can interpret it 50 different ways, but the specificity of the book of Revelation talking about, and there was war in heaven, and Michael and his angels cast out Satan. Now, I'm not making this stuff up. Now, that's a prophecy. That hasn't happened yet, in my opinion. Hasn't happened yet. So it talks of a time in the future where this great war in heaven is going to happen. The devil, Satan, is literally cast to earth, according to this particular prophecy in this book. If you believe it, fine. If you don't believe it, it makes interesting reading. Nonetheless, it seems to point to a time which we may be headed towards, and of course that's what I believe. So there are good angels, there are demonic entities, and there are fallen angels. Demons, in my opinion, are the offspring between fallen angels and the women of earth, i.e. the Nephilim. Okay. And that offspring were destroyed in the flood. The Nephilim were all destroyed in the flood. And so those disembodied spirits, in order to manifest in this dimension, and I realize I'm laying a lot of stuff on you, Bonnie, in order to materialize.
This is good. This is what I wanted to know.
Okay. In this dimension, must materialize, must inhabit something. Remember the movie The Exorcist? The demon inhabits who? The little girl, right? Why? Because she allows it to happen, because she's screwing around with a Ouija board. So she opens herself up to the demonic enters into her. There's another story where this one man, this is like a 2,000-year-old story, one man is like demon-possessed, and this rabbi, first-century rabbi, comes up to him and says, who are you? And the man answers, the demon-possessed man answers, Legion, we are many. And the rabbi goes, well, come out, and commands them to come out. And instantly the demons leave, and they go into a herd of pigs or herd of swine. The swine go crazy and then drown themselves. All that to say that demons are different than fallen angels. Demons must inhabit something, a body, something, in order to manifest in our dimension. Fallen angels can just pop in.